This is not a McFlurry, but we've all been there, craving that sweet nectar that only Ronnie McDonald can provide when we hear those dreaded words. Our machine is broken. McFlurry machines have this uncanny knack for being out of order just when you're craving them the most. It's a small tragedy of modern convenience and modern business, but we've somehow learned to just accept it. Or do we? I'm Robert Marks, and this is the Mercury Legal Sidebar. The U.S. copyright granted an exception last month for decoding diagnostic codes in food preparation equipment. This includes McDonald's McFlurry machines, enabling repair advocates to create tools that can interpret the scrambled error codes without violating 17 USCS Section 1201, which is the Digital Copyright Act. This exemption is the only useful kind that the Copyright Office can grant under Section 1201. It's Section 1201 giving someone a tool to bypass control for copyrighted work, which is software in this scenario, is a felony, punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. And that's for a first offense. To emphasize why this is such a problem is imagine there's someone who has photosensitive epilepsy and they want someone to create a plugin to Netflix on their browser that will block strobing pictures that would trigger a seizure. That's a felony under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Uh, in our ever expanding world of connected internet devices, you can imagine how outdated and restrictive this is. And to emphasize, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is from 1998. That is a very long time in the internet world. 1201 also orders the Copyright Office to invite submissions every 3 years, petitioning for exemptions to this blanket ban on circumventing access controls. And this is what happened with this McFlurry machine. So, hey, the system can work. But what is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act? The Digital Millennium Copyright Act is a law that was enacted in 1998 that implements two 1996 treaties of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. It addressed the challenges posed by digital media and the internet in protecting copyrighted works. And you need to take a step back and think where the world was in 1998 versus today. We're talking about AOL Instant Messenger, not iMessage. We're talking about Ask Jeeves, not Google, or Coggy is the search engine you should be using. Shout out Coggy. It it's incredibly hard to imagine the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which still is enforcing certain rules today, was created so long ago and how much the world has changed. But luckily, it is working in this regard. But anyway, the uh, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act has 5 titles. Most notable provisions focus on digital copyright enforcement and the responsibilities of ISPs. The key elements are anti-circumvention provisions, which prohibits the circumvention of technological measures, i.e., think like DRM, which is used to protect copyrighted works. You're prohibited from breaking, bypassing, circumventing those digital right management tools. for any reason. And it outlaws the production and distribution of devices, tools, and software that are designed to bypass such protections, even if the circumvention itself is for a lawful purpose. There's also a safe harbor provision for ISPs, which basically will protect ISPs and online platforms from liability for copyright infringement committed by their users, provided they meet certain conditions, obviously. But in a nutshell, the ISPs and these online platforms don't have to worry about it. It's just you, the end user, that will have to worry about it. Uh, there's a takedown notice process where there's a mechanism in place for copyrighted holders to request the removal of an infringing content from a website or platform. And generally speaking, that works almost to an aggressive degree. I mean, I'm sure anyone can think of an example, say, of a video on YouTube that was taken down for a copyrighted strike, maybe even unjustly or unfairly. But that provision is there, and there does have to be some side type of enforcement mechanism in place in order to genuinely protect infringement on copyrighted works. I want to emphasize very clearly that copyright is important now more than ever in this digital age. I mean, I'm foreseeing a future very soon where the economies of scale are going to be flipped upside down and everyone will have, say, a commercial 3D printer in their home. And instead of buying something from Amazon and waiting for it to be delivered from a factory, from a warehouse, whatever, days, weeks, even, you are buying the file that will then be printed at home. And you can have it in, a few minutes, a few hours, depending on the print time. That future's a lot closer, I think, than a lot of people realize. And it's really going to be really fascinating to see how it works. And one of the things that we're going to have to work on is protecting this digital asset. And I think the Digital Millennium Copyright Act kind of fails a little bit in this measure, and there's so many areas of digital rights that we could get into, like the right to repair. Like, do you, the end user, have the right to fully repair, fully customize, fully replace, fully modify any device or software that you have legally and lawfully bought and own? There's a great story about John Deere tractors and how aggressive John Deere has been in enforcing who can service their tractors and what parts can go into those tractors. It's a great debate, and maybe we'll get more on it. But to go back to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, there are exceptions that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA, provide for certain uses, such as research on encryption. A research paper that I did in law school was on encryption and the Fifth Amendment. Do you have a Fifth Amendment right to not be forced or compelled to decrypt your decrypted data, your encrypted data? It was very fascinating that I could also get to. Uh, Another exception is reverse engineering for interoperability, educational purposes, and nonprofit libraries and archives. Like, say, for instance, there is a archive of certain video games that are out there that are preserved for preservation purposes. There was another case actually recently where they were trying to advocate being able to distribute these copyrighted works to third-party institutions for legitimate research purposes, and that was shut down sadly. But anyway, long story short, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act does provide certain limited exceptions. It also provides a lot of penalties for violations, civil and criminal. As I mentioned, violation of Section 1201 is up to 5 years in jail. Felony, up to 5 years in jail and a $500,000 fine for the first offense. Don't mess around. So now let's dig a little deeper, a little deeper. We're going to narrow this down a little bit. I mean, I could talk forever on right to repair and encryption and what was the other one? There was another great example. But anyway, Section 1201, the big dog. The key provision of 17 USCS, Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the key provision focuses on the anti-circumvention technology measures protecting copyrighted works. It plays a critical role in regulating access to the use and distribution of digital content. And here's an overview. There is a prohibition, and like I said, on individuals circumventing this digital right management access control of copyrighted works. This means you cannot bypass encryption, passwords, or other mechanisms designed to restrict access to content, regardless of whether your purpose is legal, say fair use. Um, there's a anti-trafficking provision as well, where it makes it illegal to manufacture, distribute, sell, service tools primarily designed to circumvent access controls on or copyright protection, meaning it's not just wrong or let's just be clear, illegal to circumvent it yourself. It's also illegal to provide the tools designed for someone else to circumvent it. But as I mentioned, there are exceptions. The law allows for narrow exceptions when circumventing is permitted. And these exemptions are granted by the Librarian of Congress. Every 3 years, the Librarian of Congress reviews and updates a list of all exceptions that permit circumvention for certain uses. And certain examples include, say, accessibility for people with disabilities. So the earlier example I gave of someone with photosensitive epilepsy, and then someone uses a tool to bypass the browser uh, for Netflix. That is a felony, unless there is an exception, which accessibility is an exception. Research into security flaws in software devices, that's an exception, which is, I think, one. Preservation by libraries and archives. Reverse engineering, that you are allowed to do it for achieving interoperability between programs or systems. Encryption research, law enforcement, authorized law enforcement or government activities are exempt. Interesting. And then nonprofit libraries, archives, educational institutions have a limited exemption for preserving works in certain contexts. The biggest criticism of Section 1201 is it's just very broad and it restricts activities that could otherwise be considered fair use. Say, for example, studying content for educational purposes. It hampers device repair and modification by preventing the end user, from bypassing DRM. I mean, obviously, no one wants, well, the average person doesn't want certain things restricted. But the end user focusing on their device should be okay. And there is a genuine argument that it is stifling innovation and competition, particularly in areas like software development and hardware maintenance. You know, it's there is an interesting thing about, say, 40 years ago, there was plenty of TV repairmen. There's not really many now. Why is that? I mean, there's obviously a lot, that's a loaded question, but I do think one key aspect is it is harder now to repair electronic devices. I mean, hell, even take a car, for instance. You know, a mechanic almost needs a degree in software engineering, and not just a mechanic background in order to diagnose and repair certain new modern cars. And I foresee a world where cars are kind of going the way of electronics, where electronics by and large were repairable, upgradable, long lasting. And now it's almost like a lot of devices are kind of, single use. I mean, this laptop right here has the memory soldered on to the main board to the point to where I can't upgrade it or change it. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, I would say it's a bad thing. But it's just an example of potentially limiting the long-term viability of products. And that's not a good thing. I think part of that is, I mean, there's hardware issues, but I think part of that is this Section 1201. And we've all experienced that with McDonald's. I'm sure everyone listening right now can think of a time when you were told the McFlurry machine was broken. Why is that? So, now to bring this into this narrow focus of talking about McDonald's and McFlurry machines and why this exception was necessary in the first place. So, why did the McFlurry machines never work? Well, it's a variety of factors. McDonald's would say, well, it's complex maintenance and a thorough cleaning, and we have strict standards to meet health and safety regulations. And I mean, that's true. That's true. I'm not trying to discount that. But there seemed to be an issue where, A, there were frequent breakdowns, whether that's because the machines were highly sensitive or overused or improperly maintained by the workers. The biggest issue is dependency on specific technicians. McDonald's contracts specific manufacturers for their machines, and these contracts specifically require that, say, Taylor Company, who produces most of McDonald's ice cream machines, only their authorized technicians are allowed to repair them, which can delay fixes. Like you can imagine a franchisee from McDonald's, his McFlurry machine breaks down. He calls Taylor Company to send out a authorized technician. And they say, well, it'll be 2 weeks or whatever. And he's like, well, shucks, I'm going to call Jim Bob down the street. He can do it. He is prohibited, or should I say, has been prohibited from doing that. And part of that stems from the fact that the machine itself, software, and error codes that were being pushed out were copyrighted works. And so to try that third party unauthorized technician, if he was to try to interpret those scrambled codes, whether it is developing a device himself or a program or buying one that's been developed, he would be in violation of that anti-circumvention provision of 17 USCS Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and punishable by up to 5 years in jail and a $500,000 fine and be a felon. Although being a felon apparently doesn't really matter that much anymore today. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. That, as you can imagine, is a friction point. Obviously, I believe in the power of contract. I believe that two consenting individuals or entities, if they're going into an agreement fully aware, they should be able to contract basically anything as long as it's legal and between consenting adults. More power to you. So, in essence, I'm not saying that having one company produce the vast majority of a product is a bad thing. I'm not even saying requiring authorized technicians to service that equipment is a bad thing. I think that if that is considered and contracted, maybe that, adjusts the price, the purchase price, knowing that they're going to have like a 2 year, 3 year, whatever window to where they have to use those authorized technicians. And that's just a factor into the cost. And that's a benefit. Nothing wrong with that. And generally speaking, authorized technicians are more knowledgeable in the situation, but there are certain examples where it doesn't work. And one of those examples have been these McFlurry machines, to the point to where it's almost a running joke. It's a meme that you go to McDonald's and you cannot get a McFlurry. That's not working. And so I think that opening it up to where, and to be clear, this is not just hyperly focused on McFlurry machines. This is for food service equipment. So general, because there is clearly an issue, a friction point between the business owner, the vendor, the technician, and the consumer, where this is not working. This is why, even though the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is what, 26 years old, almost put up. It's able to provide some reduction in this friction, some support, something that will hopefully be a benefit, so that maybe the next time you're going to McDonald's and you're wanting a delicious McFlurry, you will leave with a McFlurry. And yes, I know this is not a McFlurry that I'm drinking right now. This is just a cup of coffee. But soon, I appreciate you watching or listening. Um, I'm trying something slightly different in my recording and editing and publishing. For those that have now listened to all 3 episodes of the Mercury Legal Sidebar, I appreciate you. I'm always looking for feedback. I love to talk. I love to ramble. I've actually debated not being as structured. Like, say for this, for instance, I kind of wanted to go down a rabbit hole of encryption and self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment and the right to repair and privacy and all this greatness. And maybe I need to do that. Maybe I need to have like an unedited or an extended version, and where I can ramble. Um, I'm trying to provide something though to people that want to listen about just a legal issue that's currently in the news. And this was just in the news, and I think it's interesting, funny, and worthwhile to be a little more knowledgeable on. And I hope after listening to this, you are a little more knowledgeable on it. You can now just say, it's not just the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it's Section 1201, and it's, or maybe you're eating a McFlurry right now and thinking, I'm fine. I get my McFlurries all the time. I don't know. Either way, I really appreciate you listening to me. Have a nice day.